Easy. Yes, we're live now.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's Communities, Public Protection and Housing Scrutiny Review Board. It's Monday, the 27th of November 2023, and it's 6 p.m. So, as always with these meetings, for the benefit of anybody watching at home, I always like to make sure we introduce ourselves. So I'll go around to my left. I'm Councillor Matthew Eyre, and I'm the chair of this board.
Hi, I'm John Sadler. I'm the head of Estates and Property Review at the City Council.
Hi, I'm Dawn Deakin. I'm Service Manager for Housing Standards at the Council.
I'm Dukwano, Councillor for Marquette and New Zealand.
Councillor Sarah Chambers for Simply and Osmaston.
Councillor Gekir Kaur, Councillor for Normanton.
Hi, I'm Gaurapan, Councillor of Marquette and New Zealand.
I'm Councillor Stephen Fair from Alveston South.
I am Councillor Celia Ingle and I'm Councillor for Chatston and Shelton Rock.
Councillor Philip Ingle, I'm here as the chauffeur.
I'm Dominic Monaghan, Democratic Services Officer.
Fabulous, thank you, everybody. So we'll make our way through the agenda. So, Dom, any apologies?
We have apologies for Councillor Dinter.
Fabulous, thank you. Late items to be introduced by the chair. There are none for this meeting. Declarations of interest. Anyone have any declarations of interest? No, I don't think it affects this meeting, but I will again declare that between October 2021 and May 2023, I was the Cabinet Member for Community Development, Place and Tourism. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of September 2023. Anyone find any issues with the minutes at all? No, okay, I'm happy to propose those. Anyone happy to second? Councillor Chambers, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on then to item 5, which is the asset rationalisation updates. And John, I believe over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Let me just on the screen talk to the presentation. What I want to talk today is provide the board with an update on the Council's asset rationalisation programme. What I'd like to do first is perhaps set some context behind the programme. In the council plan, it was identified that we need to make the best use of our property that we own. And that was obviously transferred into the delivery plan, into an asset rationalisation programme. Part of the delivery plan is covered by the delivery board, and that identified 2 key areas: maximise the use of the council house and look at the wider portfolio. The actual programme was established in autumn 22, and by rationalising the buildings that the council holds, the programme is tasked with delivering a range of outcomes, including financial savings. Can we make better use of the buildings? Can we release any buildings to surplus to our requirements, and that release some savings, which leads into sort of optimising and maximising the use of property assets. The assets we've got, are we using them? Are we maximising them? Are we making the best use of them? And sort of enhancing demand management and supporting more efficient, effective partnership working really says is, can we bring partners in to help us out? Can we support partnership working through properties that supports the council's objectives? So that's the main objectives and background for the scheme. That's all great, but how serious is the governance behind it? Well, it's controlled through an asset rationalisation board. This board reports to the council's delivery board, and just to remind colleagues that the delivery board is responsible for delivering the council's plan. It's the board that's overseeing the various strands of the plan. The asset rationalisation board is chaired by Emily Feenan. You're probably aware of Emily. She's the Director of Corporate Governance, Property and Procurement and Monitoring Officer. So quite a powerful chair there. And the membership is made with various senior directors, and I think quite importantly, the Section 151 officer on the board. So they have got a good overview of how the asset rationalisation is performing, how its deliveries, and things can be talked about quite a few. And obviously, Section 151 has got a good overview of the budget, so they can input into how that affects the budget. The 2 strands of amendment on the delivery board was the council house. Looking at the council house, in June 23, Cabinet recognised that council house was an underutilised asset. And it sort of supported the delivery of the council house optimisation strategy. I've just tweaked this slightly from the presentation you've probably got, just to re-emphasise the point, I think is what we're looking to do is redesignate the council house to be a public sector hub, a building that's not only for the city, but just for the council. I think in the presentation, we were talking about using the first floor as a public sector hub, but we're trying to look for the whole building as a hub. The benefits from us doing that are generating revenue. We can generate revenue from a variety of ways. One is through hybrid working, we can sort of perhaps bring people in from other properties outside that the council own, releasing money there. And also, if we are renting out space to public sector partners, we can generate revenue on that. I'll touch a bit on that in a minute. We can improve partnership working. If we bring partners into the council house, there's a certain synergy working with staff. Reduce our property holding costs, which comes from the generating revenue. If we release buildings, we're reducing our holding costs. And also helps regenerate city centre. The more people we can bring into the city centre, the better the regeneration. However, there's a bit of impact from that is to achieve that, we need to put significant council resources in there from property, from FM, from legal. And we might need to rejig some of the first floor to fit them all in. Obviously, people want to be next to each other, and perversely, some of the NHS people don't want to be next to other NHS people. So we just need to work that through. Bit of a 3D chess type of environment. To help us do that and understand where we are and the councils anyway, we've just completed, or a survey is just finished with the heads of service to understand what their teams are doing, how they require, what sort of facilities they want going forward. And from that, we're going to engage with services to optimise space requirements and to coordinate internal and external moves or inward moves. For example, some of that might be a reduction in storage. What we found is people certainly have got moved in and probably not looked in a cupboard for 3 or 4 years. So what can we pull stuff out of that cupboard, get rid of it, condense it down? Same with lockers as well. People have come along, have stuff in the locker. I'm just as guilty as everybody else. I opened it up, got my cup in there and a couple of papers which don't need. Let's see if we can reduce the number of lockers in there. How does that work with a team? Can we have sort of day-to-day, like gym lockers, you go in one day and the team's got a locker which people put in, put a lock on, move out the next day, and another team moving. So there's all that type of things. If we can reduce space, we can make more room for other desks to put in. And perhaps what we've found is how can we make the space more usable? You know, example is what we've found is that you walk around the council house and find people doing Teams meetings in a room of 8 desks, you know, eight chairs. So can we put some other facilities in so it stops people doing that, still giving them the privacy, but releasing a big meeting room for use. Obviously, to get the ICB in, we've got a tight programme till April 24. That's the deadline we need to meet. We're on that one, and we're working closely with all internal colleagues and the ICB to meet that. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Sure. Councillor Sandy?
Thank you, Chair. I believe this is for the council house to be used for other businesses or other bodies to use the council house, and you will get money in return, isn't it? My question is this thing being tried by any other council in the UK? Or has this been researched if any other council has done this particular thing?
It has, and people forget that we have got a public sector provider on the ground floor in DWP. DWP have rented that space for 2 or 3 years now. And what we found is council is not unique. We're not unique. There's other councils have looked at that and made a quarter. Similar discussions been going on, hybrid working. How can we make best use of it? Bringing bodies in. I think what we've focused on is actually we want to focus on the public sector, the NHS, who probably share the same ethos as the rest of our things, and also that there's better working with partners, people in people services. You know, instead of speaking on the phone, they're just a few desks away. So it's not uncommon, and to an extent we're doing that already.
Will you next?
Sheffield City Council rents half of their building out to the local paper. So it is actually that's quite interesting. Royal Oak House, we had the reason to go there to register our grandchild. And it did surprise me how we've got that building, which must cost an absolute fortune to run, and this place is nearly empty. What we did there didn't need to be done in private. I appreciate it's births, marriages and deaths. But I don't understand why that wasn't done here, because it would seem to make more sense to me.
Well, as you saw, it's on the list. And where they could intensify the use of that building, we need to do some work to look at that. How can we do it? Is there any other uses we can put to it? Obviously conscious that somewhere down the line, the marketplace will be more, you know, with the Project Assemble coming on by or whatever, you know, that's happening there. How do we make better use of that building? And so that could include looking at options. We've got to be very open-minded when we look at these. So nothing's ruled out, nothing is it, but I'm conscious that no decisions have been made, but obviously we need to focus resources. And it was felt that that was, like you've illustrated, that's probably a good start to have a look at that building.
Does it do wedding ceremonies there as well?
Yes,
it does.
There's two
Do
weddings.
them here, that'd be nice. Council Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think, so also moving on or following up with what Councillor Pandey asked. So you're speaking about public sector hub, and I just want to know, do we have assurances in place that there will be sensitive information won't somehow find its way into other, should I say, renters, as it were? Because if people are going to be taking out like desks, or not desks, like cupboards and all that, and bringing people together, do we have something in place to protect our internal documents?
We do, and what we've found is that the NHS share a similar concern from their end as well. So obviously we're quite mindful in designing the layout that, you know, if we have a team, they're not in the middle where a lot of people walk around them, can see their screens. They're in a corner, so nobody goes past. But it is something we're very, very aware of, and particularly making sure, even from an IT point of view, is to say they've got their IT systems. Are they, you know, somehow leaking information into our system and vice versa? So we are very aware of that, and we are making sure that confidentiality is paramount across the piece.
Anybody else? No, I've just got a quick one. So we mentioned obviously the impact around cost element of doing the renovations and changing things. Can you give us a little bit more information to the background of that? So are we buying sort of new chairs and desks? Are we buying new equipment for people, or is it will be brought over by them here?
Well, certainly what we're offering is almost a turnkey solution, which has been very attractive. So therefore we're saying, here's a desk, here's a chair, monitor, keyboard and mouse. Obviously some refresh on that, because obviously what's happened is through COVID, with people taking their own chairs home, there's a budget being identified to replace those chairs and replace that equipment. But also we know that some of the revenue that will be generated will be used to help sort of pump wine. So yeah. So yeah.
And just wanted to ask, is this particular direction will result in more council staff working from home, or it won't have any relation with that?
It won't have an effect, because obviously what we've done is like I said, we have this we've done a survey with the heads of service saying, well, what do you want? What's the best way you feel you can run your team? And it's almost been status quo as is now. Heads of service have come back and said we are happy with the way it's working now. So it is obviously the spaces that are available, that releases we've made available to the NHS partners.
Chambers?
So have you got sort of, not in your head, but a capacity of how many desks we want to kind of lease out, rent out?
We're looking at around about the 200 mark.
Do we know what that's going to generate for the council, or is it different for different?
But obviously I can't mention it in this public body.
Any further questions for everybody? No, okay, fantastic, thanks, John. I think just a suggestion, perhaps we'll probably cover it in the work programme going on. I think you mentioned obviously there's the wider portfolio of all the properties that we've got
Yeah.
in place. Obviously, we've discussed one, there's several that was mentioned on there, and there were several other buildings that have formed part of the sort of larger asset rationalisation strategy. I think it would.
Sorry.
Sorry, Dom. I think it would be good to sort of potentially bring some of that back to committee as well.
Yeah,
So we've
sure.
got quite in-depth detail at the council house. I think it would be good to look at some of the other buildings that we own and what the sort of longer term plan is with those ones.
Yeah, by all means.
Fabulous. Thanks, John. Okay, so with that item covered then, we'll move on to item 6. So how is the council monitoring standards in the private rented sector? Dawn, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting me to come to chat to you today. Given the title that I was given about how are we monitoring it, I thought I'd go through our team, what we do, and you can see what projects we're doing, what we do on a daily basis, really. So, as I said, I'm Dawn Deacon. I'm the service manager for housing standards here at the council. Okay, moving now. There we go. So the team, who are we? So I'm the service manager. We're mainly made up of environmental health officers and housing standards officers. So I've got 3 senior environmental health, each lead on a team. I've got a proactive team, a reactive team, and a HMO licensing team. Under that sit 5 environmental health officers, 3 housing standards officers, an intelligence officer, and a team assistant. So that's what the team's currently made up of at the moment. So what do we do? So we receive requests for service regarding properties with hazards, and that's normally non-compliant landlords. So across the city, we've got roughly 27,000 plus private rented properties. Out of those, we don't see the good landlords. We don't ever get complaints about good landlord properties. What we see is the bottom end of the market. So we see the non-compliant landlords. Tenants come to us as a last resort. They really, really do, and some of them are living in appalling conditions. So what the law says we have to do is informally approach the landlord. So we do that by letter. So we get a complaint in from a tenant. We write to the landlord saying, dear Mr. Landlord, we've had this complaint from your tenant. This is your chance to go and work with your tenant and get those hazards removed. So that's our informal approach to the landlord. If then the landlord doesn't do anything, then we'll arrange with 24 hours written notice. We have to serve a notice to visit and survey the property. We make that appointment with the tenant. We can invite the landlord along or managing agent if they want to accompany us as well. When we go into the property and do the survey, we work under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, and that's just 29 hazards that we look at. So if there's a broken boiler, we don't just go in and look at the broken boiler. We do a full survey. We stand outside, we look outside, top to bottom, in the back, look top to bottom, and then the whole of the house. So every room gets inspected, and we score any hazards we find against this rating system. We then, according to what we find, write schedules of works to landlords, what if necessary, and if we find what's called. So when we do the scoring, we look at category 1 or category 2 hazards. How serious are they? If it's category 2 hazards and they're not too bad, we'll write a schedule of works to the landlord and give them probably a couple of weeks to come back to us and say what they're going to do. If we find category 1 hazards and serious hazards, then obviously we go straight to formal notice. And that initial letter to the landlord says, please, Mr. Landlord, do the works. If you don't, we have to come out and survey. We will come and we will have a look. If there's category 1 hazards there, we come out and if we find category 1 hazards, a formal notice will be served. For service of that notice, we're allowed to charge. So we charge £772 for every formal notice that goes out. And the law says we can do that. And we give them a period of time. So the formal notice says it's a must do by this date, this time. If they don't, when we go back and they've not done anything, then we can prosecute the landlord or serve civil penalty. Prosecution, if we've got rogue landlords, we've got quite a few across the city where we want another prosecution because we want them to get a bad name across the board. We want it to go in the press. We want people to know that we've got bad landlords in the city. We'll do that. If it's a first offence and it's a minor offence and we don't really want them to get a criminal record, we can serve a civil penalty. And each civil penalty can be up to £30,000. We can do that. We have a matrix that we work with the government when the regulations came out, and we work through the matrix. And so we look at aggravating factors, mitigating factors, were they negligent, was it a slip, and we work through that matrix with every single one we do. That gives us then a total figure. We send out a civil penalty warning to the landlord saying this is coming out to you. They can make representations against that warning, and we then, we have a small committee of a legal representative, head of service, myself, and the investigating officer. We consider those representations, and then going forward we decide no, there's not anything else in there that's going to make us change our mind. The civil penalty stands, and we'll send the notice out. Or if there's some points in mitigation we consider, then we look again and we can reduce the civil penalty by up to £500 for each mitigation if we want to consider that. We have had, I think the highest civil penalty we've had was for £27,000, and the landlord paid that over 3 months. So obviously he's got the money to pay it. So, you know, they will do it if they need to do it. So what else do we do? So licensed housing in multiple occupation. We survey properties for Derby Homes because they're desperate for temporary accommodation. They haven't got the staff with the surveying skills, so we do that with them as well. We visit and check the properties under the Homes for Ukraine scheme because that came to my team as well. And so we're visiting properties there and checking that they're safe for the host to host and the guests to be living in those properties. We monitor and license properties being used for asylum seekers as well. So we work with Serco quite closely, and we look at those properties, and that is where people are waiting decisions to get their settled status to stay in this country. We work very closely and do dual visits with the Fire and Rescue Service, with the police, with gangmasters, with the Home Office, with social care and planning and building control as well. And gangmasters, we're looking at modern slavery. With the police, quite often it's cannabis grows or sexual exploitation or other things like that, but we do work quite closely with a lot of other teams as well. So I've just done a quick pie chart there. You can see that is the spread of HMOs across the city by ward. The larger pink ward, apologies, I've realised there's 2 pink. The smaller pink one is Spond and the larger one is Arboretum. So you can see obviously inner city wards where we've got the bigger Victorian properties that lend themselves to be converted, or where we've got most of the HMOs in the city. What else have we done? So Grenfell was an awful disaster that happened, and after that the Secretary of State wrote to every local authority and said, we want you to form a joint audit and inspection team. We want you to inspect all your tall buildings across the city for any cladding on the outside of buildings. So following that instruction, Derby Fire and Rescue Service and Derby City Council formed that joint inspection and audit team. All the 5-storey buildings, we only got 36. We're not a really tall building city really when you look round. So we've inspected all 36 of those. Luckily, we found no aluminium composite material or high pressure laminate externally. There were some fire safety issues internally that the fire and rescue, because they take primacy on tall buildings, that they dealt with. And then following the Dame Judith Hackett report, where she really criticised building control and some of the sign-offs that some of these private building control officers were doing, and saying they were picking up on some of the issues. There's now this new building safety regulator that is done by the HSE. Unfortunately, local authorities weren't invited to join that group, so we've not got any input into that, but there are other issues. So now planning, when people want to build a tall building, the building safety regulator now is in place at consultation stage before a spade even goes in the ground. So they look at consultation, they look at the design and look at the construction, and they can monitor what's going on and what they're doing with those buildings. So we've got a shared protocol with Derby Fire and Rescue Service, and rule of thumb is anything up to 3 stories. We'll look at anything over 3 stories. Really, the Fire and Rescue Service take precedence over. They take precedence over common parts. The Fire Safety Act came in, and the Fire Safety England Regulations 2023 changed things, and that was after Grenfell as well, and looking at external cladding. So that's now clarified the responsibility on persons' duties on multiple occupied buildings as well. So now Derby Fire and Rescue Service are responsible for everything external cladding. They are responsible for common parts, and they are responsible now for the entrance doors into the flats, where we used to be responsible for that. So they're responsible for everything that. So whether it's a balcony, whether it's cladding, anything externally or in the common parts, they take primacy for. But then we take primacy for everything beyond that flat door. So we do the inspection. We'll serve notice if we have to on the conditions of the flat. So that's kind of what we do with tall buildings. We also had a project running for the MEES, which is minimum energy efficient standards, and that project ran for 2 years, and that was funded by BAYS. And we work very closely with Warmer, Derby and Derbyshire. We did 3 promotional events with the Fantastic Homes Plan, and that was across Normanton and Arboretum wards, obviously because that's where some of our order stock is, where EPCs are low. We did a targeted approach working on data supplied by the public health analysts because we work quite closely with them and they supply stats for us. So we identified that there was 682 with EPCs F4G because every property now that's rented out has to have an EPC rating of at least E, and there was 500 with no EPCs. So we worked through quite a lot of those. We served 76 compliance notices on landlords, and we served 7 penalty notices. And all of those landlords went to appeal because that was quite new in the city, and they thought they could appeal against that decision. And obviously the council not all of them, so we got a little bit of money in from that. But it's not just that; it's about improving the properties that the tenants are living in. And so that project's now finished, but obviously that's ongoing for every property we visit now. Each individual officer picks up what their EPC rating is and then work with the landlord to improve that if we need to. The legal evictions and the harassment cases, we deal with those as well under the Protection from Eviction Act 1977. During COVID and after COVID, we did see a rise in complaints from tenants about this. What the problem we've got is that when the tenants ring the police and say I'm being illegally evicted, the police will go out and they'll side with the landlord. I've worked quite closely with Derbyshire Police and I've put together a pro forma for them to use about it's a criminal, not civil offence. So they should be siding with the tenants unless they go with a bailiff's warrant, and obviously they've got the court order to say they need to evict them from the property. They work quite closely with the police, and I've also asked them to work quite closely with their call handlers because call handlers are the first point of call that tenants will get through to, and quite often the call handlers that give you the wrong advice because they've not been educated on what to do. So I've done a bit of education with them. I've also reminded them that this is the only bit of legislation we deal with that carries a custodial sentence, so it can be quite harsh. We've had one recent case in Mag's Court, and the landlord absconded. We had to get a warrant out for her arrest. She then surrendered herself to court because we can do that. We can go and get warrants with the police. She surrendered herself to the courts. And I know the fine there is £1,610, but to us, that is a really low fine. She was actually fined just over what would be a month's rent. So it's cheaper to offend than what it is to be compliant. So we're really disappointed in that. I have been down to Birmingham and I've met with the Department of Levelling Up Housing Community, and what I've said to them is, can we please get some sentencing guidelines in for Housing Act offences for these kind of offences, because we need to be a bit harsher, we need to be a bit stricter. And for the worst offenders, if we've got 2 incidences in a 12-month period, we can actually serve a banning order. So that means that the landlords can't be landlords anymore. We can ban them from being landlords and have to get somebody that's not a relative or anybody else in connection with their business to manage the properties. Worst case scenario is that we can serve a management order, and obviously the council take over the management of the property, take in the rent and everything to do the repairs that are needed. So we've got quite strong powers under that. So damp and mould, big thing at the moment. The unfortunate death of our Ashak in Rochdale was awful, and we did see an increase in damp and mould complaints come in. And understandably, tenants are scared. The cost of living crisis is hitting hard. They can't afford to put the heating on. They've got small children there. We're seeing a lot of black condensation damp and mould because they can't afford to put the heating on. That is quite worrying. So we had instruction from the Department of Levelling Up Housing Communities to supply information for the last 3 years about our complaints and what actions we do regarding damp and mould. I've completed that report and sent it back a few months ago now. We triage according to the extent of damp and mould, and what we've done to make it a little bit better is ask for photographs now of damp and mould, because some people's perception of what their damp and mould is to what a lot of damp and mould is can be quite different. And so we've asked for photographs of the room where the damp and mould is, and then exactly the wall or wherever it is the damp and mould is, so we can look at it. We're also, part of our triage is looking at the vulnerability of tenants as well. So we look at, are there any children in there, are there any under 5s in there, are there any elderly people over 60, are there any people with disabilities, so we can triage a little bit better as well with those. We have recently served 2 prohibition orders for severe damp and mould cases, and that was to increase the thermal insulation or the thermal envelope of the building. And from November to January 21-22 to 22-23, we saw a 50% increase in urgent cases for the same period, and that's sure that was because of tenants and being worried about living in damp and mould conditions. So this is just a few photographs of what we find when we go out. These are not some of the worst, but these you can see It's quite appalling really, and what the landlord was providing in that bathroom, that downflow fan heater is just not acceptable, and you can see the damp and mould on the walls and at the back of the toilet in the bathroom. We've got hundreds of photographs like this, unfortunately. So our performance 22-23, obviously I've gone back to 22-23 because we're only in Q3 of this year. So last year we received 428 requests for service. We did 116 Home for Ukraine's properties inspections. We did 163 HMOs are visited, and they were licensed for 5 years. We did 173 management of HMO inspections because on the whole, most HMOs are licensed for 5 years. During that 5-year period, so probably year 2, year 3, we'll undertake a management inspection of those just to make sure that they are complying with the conditions that are on the licence. Sometimes we'll only, if we've not got confidence in the person who's holding the licence, we can put a condition on there that they do some formal training, and we can license for 1 year and then review it after a year. So we served 347 schedules of work or formal notices to landlords as well. And we improved 226 dwellings across the city. And by improving those dwellings, we removed 489 recorded hazards and category 1 or category 2 hazards. So how do we evaluate the team's performance? So we subscribe to something called the Building Research Establishment Housing Health Cost Calculator, and that gives us a quantity of data. So that costs me £1,000 a year, but that's quite cheap compared to what we get out of it. So we look at that, we analyse the data, and looking at 22-23, the estimated cost of repairs to the landlord was £132,795. So that averages out really across the 226 properties, £500 across for each landlord. But when we look at the total cost savings for the NHS and wider society, we've saved £337,806 for that following 12-month period. And that's wider society can be not just NHS, but if they need physiotherapy, if they need occupational health, and any of those, so it's cost savings to the wider society. So we do that on an annual basis. Before COVID, it was a lot higher than that. We're just coming out of COVID and seeing the curve going up again. So hopefully next year we'll see a bit more. So what are we working on at the moment? So got a current project going. The recent housing stock condition survey obviously showed that we've got 27,653 plus private rented properties in the city. And that estimates that 15.7% of those have got a category 1 hazard. And the three wards were worse than national average, and that's based on the English Housing Survey. And that's obviously, like I said before, where the oldest stock are Alberton, Abbey, Normanton, really. So we've received some funding from the Shared Prosperity Fund to do a 2-year project, this proactive project across the city, looking at properties in those areas. We've had ongoing recruitment issues. I've been working with Department Levelling Up as well to try and get some different courses to get more housing standards officers trained up. I'm actually working with Derby University, and I'm working with the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, and hopefully September 24 we will see a diploma course for housing standards starting in Derby at Derby University. So I've been invited to sit on the validation board after Christmas, so we'll have a little look at that to see where we're going with that. So we didn't start the project till mid-September. We've got, again, some data from the public health analyst. We've got the top 150 postcodes of order of severity where the hazards are. We've picked 2 from each of the wards, so we've got 6 streets that we're targeting currently across the city. But what we're doing is we do housing standards, but we're asking a more holistic approach, and we're working with partners across the NHS and linking in with the locality working team as well. So the 7th and the 8th of December, we've got Havelock Road is one of those. On the 7th and the 8th of December, we've organised an event with the locality working team, with social prescribers, quite a few of other people from the NHS. And one of the LACs, local authority coordinator, reminded us that those areas that we're working in, especially Havelock Road, is quite a lot of the new migrants, quite a lot of Eastern European tenants in. And on that weekend is their Santa Claus Day. So trying to engage with them, trying to use that as a way into do some more education with them. So Derby Homes have provided us with their van. We're going to have a Santa Claus giving out presents. We're going to have street cleansing there. We're going to have waste minimisation officers there. We're going to have ourselves. Quite a lot of teams working as a big hub to try and get some education across to some of those tenants. We'll do it in other areas, but it was Havelock Road is the biggest road we're looking at the moment. So we will have, like I say, other events, but that's planning for it in the future. So success stories. So I thought I'd just share a few of those with you. So these are 3 success stories we've had. So these have been published in the Telegraph, so it's not something that we can't share. So Adrian Ernest Dart pleaded guilty to a charge of non-compliance with an improvement notice that was served under the Housing Act 2004 for hazards in the property, and that was on Society Place. He was fined £6,500 and ordered to contribute £2,436 towards the council's prosecution cost. But he was also ordered to pay a victim surcharge of £170. This man was particularly nasty man. He made death threats to myself and to the investigating officer, and the police had to get involved and we had to give statements. And I did an impact statement with the tenant because she was petrified. This is awful because she actually tried to take her own life because of the way the landlord was treating her. So I'd done a victim impact statement with the tenant that was presented to the court. Due to the seriousness of the case and Dart's lack of engagement with the Housing Standards team, an additional fine of £20,000 was added, and Dart had to pay £29,106. He's a particularly nasty landlord. We have some lovely landlords and we have some awful landlords. This was another one that was in the paper. A well-known landlord fined for hazards at flats which put life at risk. So this was Yashpal Manan, who owns 40 properties and manages another 250 across the city. Well, he did at the time. He was prosecuted as again for offences at some of the homes he owns in Abbey Street. He was found guilty for non-compliance again with improvement notices served under the Housing Act, and he was fined £16,020 for failing to comply with the improvement notices and ordered to pay the council's prosecution costs and victim surcharge. And again, due to the seriousness of the case, an additional fine of £15,000 was added, bringing his total cost to base fine, to £34,442. And that was again because he'd left the tenants in dire conditions and the magistrates had couldn't favour it. This guy we've actually prosecuted 5 times now, so he's one of our regulars. Is he still? No, he's not. And again, another one, a success story, Derby landlord, and he was jailed. So Rajinder Naroy was jailed for 6 months after city council officers found dangerous problems with his flats in New Toxton Road. So he was found guilty of compliance with 2 improvement notices at the Mags Court and was fined £10,000. He was also ordered to pay the prosecution costs of £2,766 and a victim surcharge of £170. We didn't realise he defaulted on those payments, before of a fine, and he was on a suspended sentence. So luckily for us, when we took our case to magistrates court, the clerk to the court recognised him. So she advised the magistrates that he was on a suspended sentence because we didn't know that. They didn't know that at the time. So we were sat in the back of court waiting for the sentence to come through. Saw 2 security guards come, one at the front and one at the back door, which we'd never seen before because we don't get this kind of sentence. And so he was sent to prison for 6 months for defaulting and because he was on a suspended sentence. He told the magistrates he was leaving the country because he couldn't afford to stay here anymore and they thought he was a flight risk, so that's why they served that sentence of 6 months. So we were all shocked, really shocked. So it wasn't really that our case he was jailed for, but just because he was on a suspended sentence for the case as well. But our case then just brought it to the fore. So that was a massive success for us to see, because he's one of our really bad landlords as well. And civil penalties, they were introduced in 2017. The court costs don't come back to us, they go to the court and we don't see any of those, but we do get our costs back for taking the case. But civil penalties come back directly into the council, so we've seen this amount. We have, because some of them are quite large, we do payment plans, so landlords can pay them over a 12-month period, 14, 18 months period. I'd rather them do that than not pay it. So we do get this money comes back that way into the scheme, so you can see that they've gone up quite considerably. Obviously, you can see the effect of COVID 2021 went down, but obviously they're rising again now. So we are seeing that coming into the team. So that's it really. So any questions on the information I give? I'm sure there'll be lots of that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, Councillor Naha, yourself first.
All right, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say a massive thank you to Dawn and the team. Because you do an amazing job. I'm not just saying that. I can say that there are a few cases that caseworks I've had to do recently, and I just want to shout out to one member of your team, Stephen Broderick. He's been amazing. Not just in just putting our minds at ease, but also speaking to the tenants and trying to put their minds at ease and take them through the process. But that also shows that a lot of these private landlords are they think they can get away with stuff. There are cases of them remotely turning off heating, and it's crazy. You tell someone that their bills are inclusive and they can have. Of course, it doesn't mean that you should blast the heating from morning to night, but these landlords remotely turn off the heating and start threatening these tenants, because a lot of them are migrants in some of the cases I've treated, and they don't know what their rights are. So I think the first question is, or my question is there any plan to also educate tenants about what their rights are and how they can either get in contact with, housing standards, or they do get into contact with their councillors as well. But I think there also needs to be some sort of education to these tenants, just so that there's also another mechanism of holding these landlords to a code standard. Yeah. And I think that's the question.
So with regards to the turning off of the heating, the Illegal Eviction Act is harassment and illegal eviction. So harassment is withholding anything from the tenant that they've got right to have. So if we get information about harassment issues as well, we'll take it again and look at the landlord for prosecuting under that same piece of legislation. We need to get statements off tenants, which can be quite hard, and some tenants have got that huge fear of having a retaliatory eviction if they do. Get them out. So we do struggle sometimes with those cases.
Yeah, but is there something we can do in terms of educating?
Education. It's not something I've thought about, because we don't get involved in a case until the tenant comes to us. But perhaps we need to be looking at something like that. There's lots of information on the website, and when we send an acknowledgement letter out to the tenant, it does give them some links to look at our website, look at the information that they can look at and what we can give them. So there are links on that letter that goes out to them.
I'm sorry, I don't need to take too much time. I can tell you that there are a lot, even when I go to them and say, look, as your councillor, I should be able to make representations for you, but they're like, look, we're sort of new, we don't want any issues, so I think.
Even if the country they're living in terrible conditions, we don't know what they've come from to live in the terrible conditions, and they'll accept it because they've got a
yeah.
And we're saying you've got a right not to live like this.
So I think, we should also just, maybe you might want to also just look at proactively educating rather than just wait for them to report that. Thank you.
I think Council, you might want to consider a recommendation going forward for this one. Really, I think that could be something we could recommend. Councillor Ingle, your hand was next.
Yes, I was just wondering, are the HMOs growing in numbers now as recent in these last couple of years?
Yeah, they are. We're seeing quite a lot, and I think that's because we're quite cheap compared to other local authorities. We haven't got any selective additional licensing either. We've just mandatory HMO licensing.
Gaurav, you next.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Thank you for the presentation. And I myself have got involved with you a few times, sometimes with success and sometimes I don't know what happened to that case. So with regards to complaints, I looked at the Derby City Council website. I also tried to Google it, make a complaint against the landlord. And it takes you to gov.uk website. And from there, if you put the postcode in, it brings you to Derby website, but then the search goes dead. It's very difficult to find who to complain and how to complain. So I don't know if it's just with me who's struggling with, or this is something we need to look at. So making it easier. I did hear that ad in the radio. There was a campaign campaign going on. There were a lot of ads going on the radio that you should make a complaint if there is problem with the landlord. I did hear that ad, but how to do it, really how to do it practically.
Some of the adverts that are out at the moment and campaigns are for social landlords. So that's like your trusts that would, obviously we don't enforce against trusts because they've got their own commissioning body that do that. And so we've just referred those kind of tenants back to their landlord to say, or make a complaint by the commissioner. But if we go on Derby City Council website and put in housing standards, you automatically
housing standards. So now this is
or housing or something, anything.
If I put complaint against landlord, nothing coming up. It just takes you to articles. Then nothing comes up. And I know how AI is doing at the moment. There are so many people who are struggling. They're just getting so frustrated that I can't talk to anyone. This is the state at the moment. I also have one more question.
I'll just say, Councillor, we're also working on online application form that should be ready to go next week.
That would
tenants can fill it out and attach the photographs and everything as well.
So,
I suggest just quickly, Gaurav, when that's available, could that be circulated to all councillors so that if we need it, we can pass it on?
Yeah, it'll just be on the website, just be a link to
Yeah, if
it.
you can send a link to that, then we've all got it if we need to
Yeah.
pass it on to anyone. Do so.
so how difficult for housing is to find out if there are more people residing in the property? It's a let property, private, but there is the occupancy is higher than what it should be, because obviously people don't want to come on the HMO. So on paper, they are showing, oh, it's not more than 6, but in reality, it is. What powers do you have for such cases, and how quick can this be sorted out? Because you have limited number of people working for you. So
So it's an intelligence officer called Adrienne. She's employed purely to do that. So if we get intelligence that we've got more people living in the property that's potentially an unlicensed at HMO, then Adrienne will go out with one of the team as backup as well. So she goes out, she door knocks. We've worked it out now. The best time to go is about tea time, because we've tried all times during the day and people are not in on people. So she goes out tea time or early evening. She'll take an officer with her. If she can, she'll get statements there and then off the tenants about who's living there and how long they've lived there. And then she'll invite the landlord in for an interview under caution. And she can serve what's called a Section 235 notice, which demands the landlord time and place. I need to see, adding to see tenancy agreements or whatever to prove how many people are living there.
do all landlords need to register with the council now?
There's no requirement. You could have a property with 4 people in it. We'll never know that you're a landlord unless we get a complaint. Over 3 people sharing is a HMO. Over 5 people sharing has got to be licensed. But you could have a property with 4 people in and we don't need to know about it.
Some councils have gone with this kind of thing, isn't it? Registering all the landlords.
So that's additional licensing for where if it's talking about HMOs, it's additional licensing we don't have in the city. But then if we're looking at across the board, then that's selective licensing. And this project that we're running at the moment is going to, at the end of the project, come up with statistics. Have we got enough information for us to run a selective license scheme across the city? Won't be citywide, it will be certain areas, because we don't need a selective licensing scheme across the city. But we'll be looking at targeted areas potentially where we've got the stats to prove that we need to be intervening.
Councillor Cole?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I can't hear. Yeah, my question kind of partly answered by the 2 councillors. You mentioned that there's been 428 requests for your service interest for the year. I'm interested to know where those requests came from. So partly the websites that you've mentioned, how many come through the website? How many are coming through from the councillors? How many are coming through from just, because obviously people go to community centres, and especially in Normanton, as you'll know, there's a language barrier a lot of the time. So people are relying on their community hubs to access this kind of information. So where are those requests coming from? If you, in the future, perhaps you will be able to provide some sort of data on that.
Team assistant is dedicated. We've got a dedicated hotline that people ring in. We've got a dedicated website. We can get referrals from anybody, and we do get community leaders ringing in or emailing in. We work with anybody that makes a referral, really. So yourselves, anybody, tenants, the health service, EMAS, East Midlands Ambulance Service go in and they see there's an issue, they'll come to us. Police, obviously, fire and rescue service come to us. Social workers come to us, especially if there's a safeguarding issue, they need us to go in. And quite often, and I've done it, I've been up to conference with safeguarding issues where there's children with neglect. We're the only ones that get into that property that have taken those photographs, so the social workers then can see what the property's like that the children are living in. So anybody can refer in. If we've got a language barrier, then we can contact an interpreter. We can take interpreters out with us. If we do interviews under caution, we can have an interpreter there for that as well. So we do use the interpreter service quite often. Thank you.
Councillor Clark?
I just wanted to ask about the HMOs and when you have private HMOs, and when you're granting permission for these HMOs, how much is the parking taken into account? Because with the councillors I heard from Alveston North, which isn't mine, but there's quite a lot been granted there. But many people are complaining about the fact that if there's an HMO granted and there's 6 people living in that house, more than likely HMOs are single males, and as such they have a car each. So if you've just got a couple of those on one street, you've suddenly got 12 extra cars, and the house probably before had parking for 2 cars. And then suddenly you've got 12. What restrictions or how much is that taken into account when HMOs are granted?
There's nothing we can do about parking. That doesn't come under the HMO regulations. That comes under planning. So we've been working quite closely with Paul in planning to look at that as well. All we can look at is this property suitable to be an HMO? Are the rooms big enough? Because we've got amenity and space guidance. Are there enough amenities then for the tenants to share those amenities? We can't, what we do on the landlord when we get an application is we do a fit and proper person check on that landlord as well. So we're looking, is that license holder fit and proper to hold that license? We can also look at if we've got concerns, we can ask for prior notifications from the police as well to say, is this landlord fit and proper? And we've just had one back where this landlord's been convicted of violence, and so we're now prosecuting him, taking him to court, and he'll get the license taken off him, so he won't be able to be a license holder anymore. But with regards to parking, there's nothing we can do about that, and it's not taken into consideration with the bit of legislation that we use. I'm afraid that's planning.
Okay, I just say something.
Yeah.
Because they
Yeah,
get
all
multiple
planning, yeah.
objections to these HMOs,
Yeah.
particularly in Alveston, mainly because of the,
And I
they
know
know
lots
what's
of
coming.
roads, road. We know
Yeah.
we've got lots of
I'm sure you
on
have.
those roads. But there's nothing we can.
Can I come in there?
You were next, don't worry.
Just a quick one. So if somebody came and went in and bought that house and they had 6 cars, what would you expect Paul Clark to do about it?
No, well, I'm just saying, is there any,
Yeah, because
is there anything that you can do
It's
about it,
not
or
there.
is it just the fact that
It's not
you've
there.
got to accept the 6 new cars?
Well, I think the sad fact is you do, because I know in our house, for instance, when we bought it, we had 1 car. As the kids have grown up, they've had cars, I think up to 4 or 5 at one
I
time.
think that's a slightly different,
One again.
because people can see it growing and they can see how many kids you've got with it growing. But with these, there's a house that just suddenly has 6 extra cars plonked on it. When
Could anyway.
But they've got no drives to these, a lot of these in, like you say, Brighton Road, it's on street parking. There's nothing there much anyway, and then there's suddenly a fight for space for 6 more, or 12 miles against maybe.
I'll leave it at that. How many unlicensed HMOs are there in the city, do we think? Really that bad? So, because I know that people from who used to be in the serviced accommodation game have changed and gone on to HMOs with just 2 or 3 people. They don't need any licenses. So that's quite a worry, really, isn't it? Do you think we should look at having licenses for lower numbers, 2 or 3? Because I mean, there must be some slump conditions down there.
3 or more. So 2 would have been
2
3 or
or
more. But we can do that under additional licensing, but we haven't got additional licensing in the city at the
Do you
moment.
think we need additional licensing in the city?
We don't get many complaints from the smaller HMOs. We don't really get that many complaints from the larger HMOs, because I did some stats before for Councillor Khan, and we don't really. Even though there's this perception, because a lot of people have got a misperception about Hartington Street. We've got 3 licensed HMOs on Hartington Street. The rest are all self-contained flats, so they don't come under the HMO regulations.
They are slum conditions, some of them.
They
I
are,
used to work on Hartington Street, as you may remember.
yeah.
And that's bad down there.
Yeah, but people have got this misconception that they're all HMOs, but there's not. There's 3. 2 of them are our licensed temporary accommodation, and 1 is the hostel at the top. That's the only licensed HMOs there are.
Councillor Chambers?
Yeah, it's on HMO still. I'm afraid.
That's all right.
So obviously, like it's saying 11% infill. That's actually licensed HMOs, isn't it? So I know for one particular street, we've got 3 licensed HMOs, but out of that whole street, we've probably got 5 or 6 houses that are just family houses. The rest are all unlicensed because they're below what it should be. And this is the problem, I think. And this is something we do need to look at, because we could have a whole street of HMOs, but similar to what you just said, really. 2 or 3 have got the license because they've asked for it because they want more than the amount. But the whole street could be HMOs, and then it brings in your parking. Because I know I get your point, but this particular street, the parking's horrendous, which then goes on to social issues, which then the police get involved in. And I've got experience of this from this one street. So I think it is, I know obviously you can only work to legislation.
But up to 6 sharing is permitted development.
I know.
Anything over 6, then it has to have planning permission. So anybody can have an HMO up to 6 and have a
I know.
We can only work with the license conditions. We
I know.
can't put anything else
Well,
in.
this is the problem. This is the pressure it's putting on some streets in the city. I mean, if you look, some of the areas haven't got any. Well, they may have. They don't need a license.
Yes.
So I think it's a bigger issue than people think. Like you asked the question, how many unlicensed ones we've got? We don't know. I think we would all be very surprised if we actually did that work, which I know we're not going to do because it would be a big job. But I think we'd be very surprised how many we've actually got in the city. And like I say, then it's the knock-on effect of the parking, the antisocial behaviour, the neighbours falling out.
Waste generation as well. You generate an awful lot more waste if you've got 6 people living in the house.
You do, yeah. So yeah, it was just that point, but I know you can only work within the legislation, the guidelines and the licensing you've got, but I think we do need to look at potentially
additional licensing will pick up all the ones that through.
Yeah. I mean, is that something we could put as a recommendation?
Yeah.
Because at least it would tighten it a little bit. And we'd have a bit more stats to
Councillor
work
Khan
with.
was asking, looking for additional, and looking potentially for selective as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah,
Do you want to draft something up?
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
definitely, yeah.
Spendy, so your hand again?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. So, again, 2 more questions, but they're very quick ones. So if the landlord is abroad, because I had that case, how would you go about that if they are not contactable? They're abroad
So
and the property is not fit for use.
if they're a licensed HMO,
So this private landlord.
then they've got to have a managing agent they should have a managing agent in the UK that manages property. If it's an HMO, we won't license the HMO with that landlord that lives abroad. They have to have somebody in the UK resident to hold the license.
Just one property with one occupant, private landlord, and the property is not fit to live. There is a certain problem. So can housing deal with that or no?
So if they should have somebody manage it here, we can serve papers abroad, but they're not really valid once they go out of the UK. If there are issues with the property and we serve notice and they don't get done, what I did neglect to tell you is that we can do works in default of the landlord. So we use Derby Homes as our contractors. They'll go in and do the works that need repairing. We then put a charge against the property as a local land charge, but we can then apply to land registry and put it as a secondary charge on the mortgage, where the mortgage is at the bottom. We put secondary charge on that we get priority charge. That's called. So if the property's sold, we get priority charge and the money comes straight back to the council.
The last one from me is, although like landlords get bad name, but there are some tenants, as we know, they won't be God sent, and they have trashed the property, comes to you. How does that, as a housing standards, do landlords get a fair trial?
Yeah, because any tenant damage we can't take into account when we're looking at hazard scoring. We shouldn't be taking into account. We're looking at what maintenance issues have not been completed by the landlord. Have the landlords done any maintenance on the property? We don't look at anything that the tenants have done. Tenant damage, we can't put tenant damage on our notices. We shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, but I think that's why some landlords already have some money that they withhold upfront. So the deposit.
The damage is really big, it won't cover it.
Sorry?
The damage is really big, then it won't cover.
Yeah, well, then but I think that sort of like gives some sort of mitigation against.
So some landlords ask for a deposit and that has to be registered in a tenancy deposit scheme. If it's not registered, then obviously the tenants can then put a claim in against the landlord and claim 3 times back what the deposit was. The tenants can do that if they find out that it's not registered. More often than not, they won't take a deposit because of that problem. And what they'll say is they'll just have a month's rent in advance and they get around it that way. The crafting, some of us are very crafty.
Any further questions for anybody?
Can I just ask you said about recruitment issues. What do you think is stopping people from obviously coming into housing or taking that step?
Traditionally, we were an environment health officer. I'm a trained environment health officer, and you had to have a degree to do that. And historically, it was because there's 5 disciplines across environment health. So you've got housing, food safety, health and safety, licensing, and environment protection. And what it was that you were trained in all of those areas, and then if there was a shortage, you were moved around. And I can remember when I first started, we were shifted around teams where you were needed. Now, that's changed now because you have to have food safety competency with the Food Standards Agency. So I'm not food safety competent, so I can't, none of my team can't do that anymore. So I'm saying, let's look back. Let's say, why do we need to be environmental health officers? Why can't we be housing standards officers? Why can't we be food safety officers? Let's specialise again in the area that we used to do. Because I started off as a technical officer. I started off as a nurse and then a technical officer in one of the health and safety team. And so why can't we do that? Have more specialised technical officers in that role? And I just don't think it's sexy enough that kids are attracted, or we're not putting the message out there. The Chartered Institute are not putting the message out there. So come into environmental health, it's a good, a good career. There's different pathways you can take. But I mean, I'm a volunteer for Enterprise for Education, so I work with those as well. And I go into schools and I do mock interviews with the kids and things, and I talk about environmental health and try and raise that profile every time I go in and just say, on a voluntary basis, have you heard of environmental health? Do you know what we do? And none of them do. Environmental health, if it's something to do with pollution, is something to do with the air, whatever, they don't know. So we do try and do that and promote it, but I just don't know why that people aren't coming in. So that's why I've gone back to Department of Levelling Up and said, can we look at doing something? The Mayor of London recognised there was a problem in London specifically, so he set up with Middlesex University this one-year course to get housing standards specialist officers. That's what I'm working with the Chartered Institute of doing, to say, let's get that in Derby. Yeah. I've campaigned nationally because I sit on the National Private Housing Officers Group to say, who else would come on board with this? And everybody wants to come on board because they want to see this course run. So hopefully we'll get it off the ground. It's £3,000. It's a one-year course, but I've canvassed look and said, would you consider, because it doesn't attract the apprenticeship levy, would you consider paying? And they're like, well, yeah, we might consider that. So it might not cost us anything to put officers through. And I'm saying, we don't need housing officers. Come and join us, like an apprentice sort of thing. Let's have a little look at what we do. Let's get you through this course, and then we'll have a bank of people that can nationally.
There's a couple of quick questions from me.
Yeah.
Where do letting agents fit in all this? Because I mean, I rent via a letting agent, and I've had 3 or 4 issues in the few years that I've been there, and I've never spoke to the landlord about any of them. I've only ever spoken to the letting agent, and if something does or doesn't happen, it tends to be down to the letting agent and the property agent. So where do letting agents sit?
It depends what the agreement is between the landlord and the letting agent. Some letting agents are tenant finders only, so they'll find the tenant, put them in, sign you in, do all the tenancy deposit, and then the landlord takes everything else on board. Some of them have got I don't agree with the landlord that says, okay, anything up to £500 then do, and then we'll sort it out. Some of them have got do everything for me because I'm not here. But we've got some good managing agents, we've got some not so good managing agents across the city, just like we have landlords. But we deal with a lot of managing agents, and managing agents will come on the inspection with us, and we can tell them there and then what he's doing. But if you are having trouble with managing agents, let me know. If I've got particular problems with a couple of managing agents I've done before, I've brought them in and done a formal but informal interview and said, this is not good enough. I'm not happy with how you're managing the properties. Why are you taking on properties that of this standard? You should know that there's a set standard that these properties should be up to. So I'm not afraid to do that either, councillor. So, but if you are having problems with managing agents, let us know. We tried to set up some training for managing agents. We were going to do it at the Derby Conference Centre. COVID hit, we didn't get that off the ground, but we didn't get many come forward to say, well, each officer was going to run a scenario, a workshop on different areas, what we could train them in. I think we had 4 or 5 interested, and the rest just didn't want to know. Yeah.
Do we have the ability to take action against managing agents if it comes to that?
Yeah, we do.
Have we got any examples?
Serve notice on managing agents if we need to do that as well. Yeah.
Okay, fab. The other thing that thought to me is sort of the kind of repercussion action that landlords can attempt to take. Obviously, we mentioned the no fault, the evictions. Obviously, we come under no fault evictions in this case. But have we seen any examples where a landlord has been fined and their response has just been to put the rents up to try and get that money out of the tenant? Because I can see an issue in that aspect of landlords just going, right, well, you've complained about me, I've gone to this expense, do you know what, you can pay it.
Some landlords do that. We've seen a couple of examples. I think that's happened. Okay. That's happened.
Have we
got no control?
I say we've no ability, have we, to act against that and for prevention on it or anything like that?
But we've seen horrendous. I mean, a couple of years ago, you could rent a 2-bedroom terrace property for about 500, 550. The housing allowance, if tenants are on housing benefits, £500 capped, 550. That was manageable. Now we're seeing 750, 850 for a 2-bedroom property. So where are the tenants going to find that extra additional money that they're not if they're on housing benefit? And I was saying earlier on, I've heard a 2-bedroom terrace on Chester Green, £895 is being rented out for. It's just, how do people top that up? Where did they find the top up from? It's just horrendous. And that, because we're short stock, landlords can charge what they like, because that particular person had 12 people saying, I want the property, I want the property, because we just haven't got the properties in the city for people to rent.
We know there's in one of the flats, the 2-bedroom flats with the co-op at Charleston. And we know, obviously, we rented some of that, back then, but they live there. And the new landlord's taken over from Powers, the new landlord, put the rents up. That's one of the reasons. And they put their rent up. What was theirs?
From 550 to 680.
680. Then there was a private flat there, and she wants to sell it, but she can sell it with a tenant in. So she put it on the market to rent at 700. He saw that advertised at 700, and then put theirs up to 700. And that was
the landlords have to serve a notice to say that they're going to put the rent on, but if they haven't served that notice, they'll find themselves in trouble just doing that.
So I think that's where the education bit comes back again, because a lot of people just think, well, it's a landlord's house, isn't it? They can do whatever they want with it. And I think a lot of landlords are getting away with just how uninformed, and to put it mildly, about these issues and rights some of their tenants are. And so I think if we shine more light on that, perhaps that may act as a mitigating factor against just some of these behaviors.
It's how you bridge that gap, though, isn't it? Because a lot of these people that are being exploited, and that's what's happening, are probably the most vulnerable in society, i.e. they've come from another country, or they don't want to be homeless. So it's how you bridge that gap. Start saying educate them, but how do we police that? How do we make sure every new tenant has got a leaflet saying that we're educating them about? They daren't come forward. It's how we bridge that gap, and this is why landlords are getting away with what they're getting away with. The house is in not a very good state. Until they complain, you don't know anything about it. We don't know anything about it. So it's how we bridge that gap, isn't it?
Well, that's where the language barrier comes in as well. Then it would be all right putting a leaflet out for every house in English, but not everyone's going to be able to read that. And
yeah,
the proactive project, we're obviously door knocking. We are asking, have you got problems because of this extra funding we've got at the moment? The letter that goes through, we've had translated into 6 different languages as well. So, and it's just a brief paragraph saying, this is what we're doing on your street. If you've got problems, we need to know. A lot of the tenants are coming back to us, but when they're looking at it, they're the better properties. So what they've done is they've street walked, they've looked what looks the worst along the street. Let's target those first from the outside, because if they look bad from the outside, they're going to be bad on the inside. But what tenants that, like I said, that are coming back to us are the ones that have got the better properties because they're not afraid to complain there's something wrong.
Yeah, this is the problem, isn't it? This is the problem.
Anyone, any other questions? Yep. Do we have any recommendations you want to put forward on this? Anybody?
Obviously the additional.
That's one I you first.
Yeah, I would like to recommend that we look at creating education for tenants about what their rights are when renting and how they can reach out to the housing standards if they feel that the standards of the accommodation don't meet that which have been set by the council.
Bob, anyone second that?
I'll second that with addition, and then, yeah, exactly my point as well, but I would encourage council to use social media to highlight this issue. And also, like you said, an inquiry form on the Derby City Council website, something to make it easier for them to contact. So so if they can, education leaflets, in my opinion, they rarely work. No one, they just go straight in the bin. If something keeps coming on the social media, that will make more. This is my experience. Some people may disagree with me. Social media has bigger impact in today's world. People can even translate, if they are on their own language, Facebook, or especially with Facebook, they can just use the translate, and that helps. Infographics, big thing. That's what
Maybe with the barrier.
So that would be a recommendation.
Councillor Corso, your hand?
Yeah, just add on to that, if that kind of information can be targeted at key community hubs, so where people might go to seek any sort of help, whether it be like religious groups or, you know, all sorts of community centres that you see. So the community centres can take some autonomy in terms of, if, you know, because obviously we can't cover every language, we can't cover every sort of literacy barrier, we can't cover everything, but maybe some of the community centres might be able to, if they have the information to hand, they can get it out to people that need it.
The big problem we've got as well with the Roma community is that quite a lot of Romas are illiterate. You know, they don't read, can't read, can't write, can't understand. So even if we send written information, that's not good.
Okay, I've tried to pull that together. So what I've sort of come up with is the board would recommend to organise a campaign and ongoing programme to educate tenants on their rights and how to reach out to housing standards if they are experiencing issues. The information will be targeted towards community and religious hubs, organisations and local councillors for distribution in their communities, and would be outlined in the simplest way possible.
Spot on.
Everyone okay with that? Okay, so as it was your proposal originally, would you like to propose that?
Yes.
And Gaurav, I've got you down as seconder. All those in favour? Fabulous. Councillor Chambers, do you have a separate one, or did we sort of encompass it there?
No, just I don't know if you need to document this now about putting forward about additional licensing.
Is it selective licensing or additional?
Selective licensing will be any property across that area. Additional licensing is for HMOs below 5, so between 3 and 5 people.
Yeah, the additional one, yeah, is what I'm proposing. Because like I say, on a street, we could have 20, but only 3 are actually HMOs that need a licence, so.
Really good. But even additional licensing would be area specific, if I understand correctly.
No, additional licensing will be any HMO where there's 3 or more sharing, but under 5, so 3.
Across the city.
Across the city. Additional will be brought situated. Selective licensing will be any property would be licensed, but that is selective areas. But we have to have the statistics. And if we want to go wider than specific areas, we have to get Secretary of State approval to do that.
We had such a long debate in the council house for this Article 4 thing. I can't expect it to be that easy. If it's that easy, we should have done it by now.
You need the evidence. You need an evidence base before you can consider
I
it.
have given evidences.
For additional licensing.
I've given loads of complaints already for my area.
But it's got to meet certain criteria. It's not just like.
I haven't heard that, so I'll have to check. But I have already, Alveston has already given. I don't think any other area has given any. But that if addition is that easy, then why haven't been? But how about selective? Is it also that difficult?
Selective, whatever else we bring in, we're going to need additional staff to do it.
Yeah. So is selective easy or additional easy?
Sorry,
Which one is easier, selective or additional?
Additional would be easier.
Let's
go for it. It wouldn't. The areas that we need to be working in, potentially additional wouldn't cover those areas. Selectively licensing, we look at poor housing demand, antisocial behaviour, lots of littering, you know, all those other issues as well for selective. Additional licensing is just, we're going to license you, we're going to look at what you're doing where you've got 3-4 people sharing.
So you still have to build up evidence to be able to.
You have to build up an evidence.
Do you think are you confident that you can build that evidence?
So Ian Fullergate is writing a report at the moment. The proactive project will supply some of that evidence, but we're already looking at it as well.
Mr. Fullergate is on it, I'm sure he'll get done very well.
He's apologised tonight, he can't make it tonight, so I don't know if we can see at home, so. But we are looking at that because Ian Fullergate is now my head of service, so all housing services are all together now, so we.
That's the boy, shall we call it?
Councillor Chambers?
Sorry, just to confirm. So you need evidence for selective licensing, not additional
We need
licensing.
any evidence to bring any licensing scheme.
Any licensing scheme.
Any licensing scheme, we need the evidence, yeah.
To do it.
Why do we think we need additional licensing in the city? We need.
Right.
It needs to meet certain criteria.
If Mr. Fullergate is working on a project to get that additional licence and getting on the evidence.
Councillor Khan that's looked at potentially selective. And yes, it will bring in additional fees, but we need the fees to be able to pay the staff and we can't get staff. The last recruitment I put out 4 times an advert and went nationally in a national magazine, still couldn't get anybody. So at the moment, we've got a contractor because that's what I need to get the job done.
Oh, there's millions of people employed.
It's so annoying. It's frustrating.
Okay, so I've had another go at trying to bring everything together on that one.
Good luck.
It sounds like we can't, as a board, recommend the introduction of it, given that the evidence base needs to be established. But we can essentially recommend that the evidence base is established. Sounds like where we are for this. So I've gone for that the board recommends that the relevant cabinet member and senior officers investigate the existence of the evidence required to introduce additional licensing, especially with regard to addressing the issue of HMOs, which are not captured by existing legislation. So that sort of cover what we wanted to do. Councillor Chambers, as it was your idea for this one, are you okay with that recommendation to propose it?
Yeah.
Anyone happy to second? Councillor Ingle, you were first. All those in favour? Fantastic. Any other recommendations that anybody wants to put forward? No? Okay, fabulous. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll get those to you, Dawn, and we'll circulate round so everyone's got a copy of the wording. Okay, so the final item on the agenda then for today's meeting is the work programme 23-24. So we have 2 further meetings for the rest of this council year. So I'll have one in January and we'll have one in March or April time. I'll get some potential dates circulated to everyone and we'll see what dates we can do. Does anyone have any suggestions for anything they want to include on the work programme for either of those meetings? Personnel.
Did we not have at the last meeting that we're going to get an update in regards to PPOs?
I think that
Locality or lands.
I think that comes under, let me just bring the work programmes directly up. That comes under the localities presentation in January.
Yes.
Anyone else any suggestions? That's
There's only a few topics and it says Rainsway. Is that to discuss the tip on Rainsway?
It's whatever we want to discuss, really. We can, we can put that on as one to bring up. Obviously, we're expecting, I think there's going to be an announcement. I don't remember said in December, we're expecting the announcement. So we could put that on for sort of April time if it's introduced at that point. So yes, we put that one down then for March, April, and then we'll get a bit of a sense of what the change has been, when's it going to be introduced and where we are with it. Yeah, fabulous. Okay, fab. Councillor Fab.
We in the January meeting, myself, I think Councillor, we had that virtual headset on knife crime and that.
Yeah.
Are we going to have some feedback in that meeting? I know you suggested it to.
Yes, that was certainly the intention. I'll chase that up with them and ask if we can get some feedback on how that's gone.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no further suggestions, if anyone has any suggestions between now and the next meeting, please do bring them forward. We can get them onto the plan from there. Oh, with everything done, I'll close the meeting. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much.
Right.